Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mina Jane. I am one of the programming librarians at the Cary Library, and I'm really happy to be bringing you this program on managing your money. So I wanted to say really quickly that we always like to thank our foundation, the Cary Library Foundation, for supporting all of our programs. We would not be able to do it without them. And you can ask questions in the chat or during or after the presentation, and I'll be keeping an eye on that. Or you can unmute yourself and ask Inessa directly. So, Anessa Manning is a certified financial planner with over 20 years of experience in the financial services sector. She has worked with individual and institutional clients in New York, London, and Washington, D.C. before moving to Boston in 2010. She graduated from Columbia University and earned a master's in business administration from NYU's Stern School of Business. She has held a variety of positions in investment banking, financial analysis, and public policy at institutions including Citigroup, FINRA, and Fidelity Investments. Currently, this is the part I like. Inessa serves as the president of the Cary Library Foundation, whose mission is to raise private funds to augment the budget received by Cary Library from the town of Lexington. And I have to say, I was absolutely thrilled to find out that on our board, our Cary Library board, we had somebody with such an amazing talent. And I was really thrilled when Inessa offered to do this program for us. So I'm going to turn it over to her, and we'll just get started.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mina. Thank you for that introduction. I'm excited to be here, very happy to be associated and proud to be associated with the library. There's so many great programs and services and resources that they offer. So I'm happy to serve on the Cary Library Foundation as well. So Mina had rattled off my whole bio, but basically I spent a lot of time advising companies on making their financial decisions, and have transitioned to advising individuals, which I actually like so much better. Working with companies, definitely the numbers are larger, but the decisions, when company A is trying to figure out should they buy company B, it's very factual, very analytical. Whereas when you're working with people, it's when they're thinking about, do they want to save and buy a house, for example, it's very personal, because that decision is where they're going to be sleeping every night and eating dinner most nights, and it's going to really impact their lives. So I find that much more rewarding, and I love talking about finance, because it can be a very dry and dull subject in some ways when you just think about the numbers, but again, I truly believe in it does impact how we are able to live our lives. So I think it's one of those things that's really important. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And while we do that, I'm just going to say what Mina said as well, is feel free to ask questions. We're leaving plenty of time for questions at the end, but also as I go through things, if you want me to slow down, or you have a question on a particular subtopic that I'm talking about, please raise your hand or type into the chat function as well. I'm happy to take questions as we go. So today, what we're going to be talking about is the ins and outs of handling your money. It's part of the library's Back to Basics series that also includes important life skills like sewing and cooking. And handling your money, I would also think, is in that category of basic life skills. So the first thing, I'm just going to see, for some reason, it's not letting me flip my slide to the next slide. Why is that? See all slides. Do you still see my screen, Mina?
Yes, I see your screen, and it did move to the next slide.
Oh, it did. Okay, just not for me.
Oh.
Okay. Do you see the establishing a budget slide?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure it's going to do that. So we'll see how smooth the slide transitions go. But really, this first slide is in terms of managing the ins and outs of your money. To me, it's all about establishing a budget. Now, the word budget might be a little scary and intimidating, but really try not to think about it that way. All it is a financial roadmap. Just think of it as a path. It's a way that you can see where you are in terms of your income and your expenses. And it can also be a tool to help you identify what your financial goals are. So what are some things in life that you're trying to achieve that you need to save for, that you need to put money aside for? And a budget is going to be that plan to help you get there. So that's really all it is. It's going to depend on where you are on your life and in terms of what some of your goals might be. But that's really what it is. It's to document what you're taking in, what you're spending, what hopefully the leftover is, and then how you want to allocate that leftover in the future. So that's really it in a nutshell. And I think in order to understand and have that financial picture, you really do need to write it down. That can be scary and intimidating in a way, because you're not quite sure, okay, do I have more expenses than I do revenue? Am I scared and nervous about looking at my financial situation? But what I can tell you is that if you don't look at it, it certainly doesn't go away. It is what it is. And if you do look at it, that enables you to figure out, okay, how can I change and modify things to bring things back in line in the future?
Inessa,
Yes.
would you do, if you're writing down your budget, would you do it month by month or week by week? Like, how granular would you do it?
Yeah, so I'll talk about that in a minute. But
Okay.
typically what works well is to do a monthly budget, to track things on a month by month basis. And then maybe wrap it up at the end of the year to kind of look back for that year. But we'll talk about those time periods too. I think the first step is really identifying what's coming in to you, so what your income is, what you have available to spend. So that income is something that you want to look at after you pay your taxes, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And some items on the income side, if you're working, it's obviously your salary. But you want to look at all income sources. So there might be other sources of income that you have available to you. Maybe you have a side job. Maybe you babysit once in a while. Maybe you receive some support from your family. Maybe if you're older, you're receiving a pension. You're drawing from your retirement savings. Maybe you have some investments that earn some income. So you want to think holistically beyond just your salary and figure out, okay, what are the buckets of income that I have? So that's on the income side. That's what you're getting in. In terms of your expenses, that's what's going out. So you want to look at that as well. You're going to want to look at your needs and your wants. And there's a little bit of a gray area that can happen between the two. But a need basically is what you need for survival. You need food, you need shelter, you need to pay your debt. Those are going to be your basics. And then there's other things that you're going to want. So you might go out and get a cup of coffee every morning. That's something that you might want to do. It's entertainment, it's vacations. And again, there's some blurring of line, because when you're shopping for food, you can kind of go for the higher price grocery item or something that's more budget oriented. So there's some categories that are definitely needs, other categories that are definitely wants, and then some things that can kind of blend in between. But the basic takeaway here is that you're going to want to document what you're spending your money on a monthly basis. And I guess I would also just recognize that sometimes you're going to spend more than just those basic needs, and you're going to want to do that because that nourishes yourself. That's sort of necessary for your own sort of having a good mental state. And I think that's important to recognize as well. So, where we need to be careful about spending, that's certainly important. But sometimes making a splurge here and there, that's important too. So I think that needs to be recognized. All right, so we're going to just dive in very quickly on income. So again, income is obviously, if you're earning a salary, it's going to be your salary. You're not going to get your gross salary, however, deposited into your bank account. There's going to be deductions that come out of that. There's going to be deductions for taxes, for federal taxes, for state taxes, for payroll taxes, things like Social Security tax and Medicare. And then also, if you're working and drawing a salary, there'll be deductions for other things, for benefit plans, for dental insurance, medical insurance, those sorts of things. And your company might also offer some other perks, or other opportunities. There might be flexible spending accounts that there are deductions for that you can opt into. There might be, there's sometimes transit related programs that if you take the subway to work, you can sign up for and have a pre-tax deduction that can save you a little bit of money. So I think the main takeaway here is that you should really understand your salary. You should understand what is coming out of your salary. You should understand if there are other things, if you're working for a large corporation in particular, are there other benefits that you're entitled to that you might want to use? And if there are things that are coming out of your salary, are you actually using those? If those are things that are perks and benefits that are optional, so you want to make sure that you're monitoring that and you're really using the things that are the benefits that are available to you. It used to be back in the day that you would always receive a paper pay stub. Nowadays, there's so much electronically and so much automatic payment that you might have to proactively search out where your pay stub is. But if you don't know and you don't look at that on a periodic basis, you should definitely find it. And definitely somebody in your HR department can help you locate that. So if it's your salary, it's pretty easy to identify what your take home or after tax pay is. That's the amount of money that's getting deposited into your bank account on a net basis, your net pay. If you have income sources from some of those other items that I talked about, so it might be a pension plan, Social Security, a babysitting job, those other things, it's likely that taxes are not being withheld. For something like Social Security, you can sign up for Social Security to have withholding done on your Social Security checks. If it's a pension plan or money coming out of a retirement plan, sometimes the brokerage firm or the retirement plan administrator will withhold a standard withholding of 10%, but that might be more or less than you actually pay in taxes. So you want to figure out what your after-tax income is, and that's really important so that you don't, if you're receiving money where there's not tax withholding and you're spending 100% of that, at the end of the year when it comes time to file your taxes, you will likely owe money to the government, and you'll need to have that money set aside somewhere in order to pay them so that you're not hit with a bad surprise. So circling back to budgeting, the budget income number that you want to use is your after-tax income. And that's very important. All right, so now we're going to the expense side. So I was going to mention that it's, I think, helpful for budgeting purposes to construct a monthly budget because typically expenses roll up more nicely on a monthly type of basis. So if you're paying rent or mortgage or a debt payment, those are typically monthly bills. The easiest way, I think, to get a handle on what your expenses are is just to sit down and track things for 1 month. So there's some apps that are available, and I'm going to go over what those are, or some of those, or many of them, at the end of the presentation. But basically, you can do it through an app on your phone, a website that you sign up for, or just pen and paper, just jot it down. It is a little cumbersome at first, but once you get into the groove of writing things down, believe me, it does become easier. So you're going to want to do that over the course of a month. Then once you have that, you're going to want to group things together. So you're going to want to group your spending on food. You want to group your spending on entertainment together. If you're buying clothes, you want to roll up those expenses into one category. And what you're going to find is there are certain expenses that are fixed and very predictable, like your rent or your mortgage payment or your real estate taxes, and you're going to know what those are. And then there are expenses that are going to be more variable. And for those, like, so for example, for maybe it's your food, maybe there's 1 month where you go out to eat a whole lot. And so that month is you're spending more money on food than you might another month where you're staying at home and cooking. So there's going to be some variation in expenses. And that's okay. What you want to do is be able to recognize which expenses are fixed, so which ones are predictable and and which ones there might be some fluctuation month to month. And for the ones where there's fluctuation month to month, those categories, it could be food, it could be clothing, it could be entertainment, you're going to want to come up with a really good estimate. And I have on here, be conservative. So it's probably better to round up and go with what you think your maximum amount that you're going to spend, and use that for your budget purposes at first. So any questions so far on revenue, income, expenses?
I do have a question, Anessa,
Sure.
and I don't know, but some of the things that we do have interest involved in them. So like if your credit card, you don't pay it off right away or something like that. So how do you include something like that in your budget?
Well, so you're going to want to identify what your debt is. So it could be credit card debt, it could be student loan debt, it could be mortgage debt. So if it's mortgage debt or student loan debt, you're going to have a set monthly payment. So you're going to know what that is. If it's credit card debt, well, so you're going to want to figure out, okay, what's the balance that you're carrying on your credit card, how much you're paying in interest for that. And you're going to need to track that separately. The idea, hopefully, is that you, and we can talk about this in a minute, but it's to try to, it's always better not to carry a month-to-month balance on your credit card. And you're going to want to also break out the expenses into the bucket. So, for example, if you're using your credit card to pay for dinner, I'm assuming that might be one likely place where you're using your credit card, you're going to want to record that dinner expense as food or entertainment, depending on how you're categorizing the buckets of your spending. And then you're going to want to, so that will be one expense. But then the credit card interest, you're going to want to put that down as that would be a fixed expense. So you're going to want to know what that is. And that's going to depend on the amount of debt you're carrying on your credit card. It should be stated on your credit card bill. So you could look at maybe like the last 3 or 4 months of bills and figure out, okay, what's the average of that interest payment that you've been paying. If you can't find it on your bill, you can certainly call up your credit card company and ask them for what that amount is. But if you're paying your monthly minimum of credit on your credit card bill, the way you want to break out your expenses in a monthly budget is on the items that you're actually spending. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Right. All right, so then we come to step 4, and I originally had on this slide, this is the scary part, because this can be the moment, and I think it's the moment for everybody where you're like, okay, are my expenses in line with my revenue? But you have to do it. And again, as I said before, the situation is not going to change if you don't do it. So this doesn't change. Like when you do this simple calculation of income less expenses, when you hit that button and you subtract out the expenses from your income, you're not spending any money. So nothing is changing in your financial picture when you do this. You're just getting an understanding of what that financial picture is. So again, but I do recognize that this can be a scary step for sure for anybody. I actually have an example in here. And when I did the example, I even had that moment of holding my breath to see, okay, is this fictional person? Are they in the black or in the red? It happens to everybody. All right, so this is just a general financial advisor rule of thumb, and you could see different rules of thumb. Different advisors will have different pieces of advice. I think these are good to keep in mind, but aren't necessarily fixed. So if your budget, once you do it, hopefully you will after this program, if this does not line up with your budget or your situation, that's okay. But this is a rule of thumb that could give you a good framework to work within, especially as you're starting out and you're trying to figure out, okay, maybe I just took a new job, I'm going to get paid X amount of money. How much can I spend on rent every month? That's where these rules of thumb can be really useful. And so what this one is the 50, 30, 20% rule of thumb, which means allocate no more than 50% of what your take-home pay. So again, that's after taxes. That's the money that you have available to spend. Allocate no more than half of that on a combination of rent, utilities, and any debt payments that you have. Then spend about 30% on things that you want. So this might be going out to dinner pre-COVID or hopefully post-COVID with friends, going to the theater, travel. So this is allocate no more than roughly 30% on things that you want. And then that will give you or allow you to save 20% for future financial goals. Again, this is a rule of thumb. If you're not currently saving 20%, not currently able to, don't freak out. You know, things can change over the course of your lifetime for sure. But this is a nice goal to try to aim for, is to save 20% for your future financial goals. All right, so this is the fictional budget that I drew up so we can kind of see how this works. And again, this is on a monthly basis. So this pretend person has a take-home salary of $3,262. Sorry, my eyes are a little bad there, dollars a month. Here are their needs. You know, they need to pay rent, they have utilities, they have a car payment, they have a student loan payment, they need to spend money on food. And then they also have their wants. They want to go out and see their friends and do social activities. And they want to allocate a little bit of money towards their wardrobe and personal items. So this is roughly how it worked out here for this fictional person. And what that allows them to do is have a net income and a savings rate of about, I think it came to 16%. So this isn't exactly lying out, like I said, with that 50, 30, 20% rule, but it's not so far off that with some tweaks and maybe savings, maybe this person, if that's something they're striving for, could reach. It's in that realm of reality. Okay, so assuming that you have money left over at the end of the month, that you have an amount that you have the ability to save, what are you going to do with that? So you could, without having a budget, without thinking about your financial goals, spend that on more wants, or you could be more intentional about it and use that to save for your financial goals. I think what my recommendation would be is to try to identify about 3 or 4 goals that fall into kind of a short-term bucket, a medium-term bucket, and a longer-term bucket. And when I say the word bucket, I really just mean category, you know, type of goal. Or goal, the goal itself. So bucketing your goals. And so like having like 3 or 4 of those goals typically is workable. You know, in life you can have hundreds of different goals that I'm dreaming of this trip and I want to go here and I want to buy this and that. But it's good to narrow it down and prioritize. And that way it becomes more realistic to achieve those goals. You're going to have goals that fall into short-term categories, like maybe you're putting aside money to buy a really nice present for your mother. You're going to have goals that fall into more of an intermediate category that might be in a year, 2 years, 3 years, that type of 1 to 3 year time frame. And then you're going to have your longer term goals. So maybe you're saving for a down payment on a house. And then maybe you want to put aside some money to prepay some of your debt, to pay down some of your debt early. So ultimately you're saving on interest rates. So maybe that's a fourth bucket that you have. So what this fictional person did is they took their net income, they divided it by 4 because they identified 4 goals to themselves, and they're saving about $127 a month on each of those goals. Might not feel like a lot, but at the end of 12 months, they're going to be able to buy a fairly nice present for their mother. In about 2 years, they're probably going to have enough money where they can take that trip to Italy, assuming that we get past this current COVID period and we can all travel again. Paying for a down payment on a condo at $127 savings a month, you're going to, over the course of 5 to 8 years, you're going to accumulate a certain amount. It might not be quite enough for a down payment, especially here in the Boston area, but it's going to get you on that track. And maybe as you get closer to it, maybe you've gotten a promotion and you have more money that you can set aside. Maybe you're going to put off travel for a few years, so you can allocate some of your previous travel budget to saving for a condo. So some of these buckets and goals are going to change over the course as you move along and down your life path. And if you're prepaying your student loans, maybe you're able to pay those off early, and that's not only going to save you the amount that you're putting aside to prepay those, but that might actually save you the amount that you're spending on paying off your monthly student loan payment as well. So that's the budget in a nutshell. You're going to put down your take-home salary, that's after taxes. You're going to categorize what your expenses are, and you're going to subtract out those expenses from your salary. You're going to arrive at a net income. Hopefully that's positive, and we're going to talk in just a minute about what to do if it's not, but hopefully that's positive. If that is positive, you're going to think about, okay, what are my financial goals? You're going to come up with a short list of 3 to 4, and you're going to begin allocating what you're saving to those different categories. And more likely than not, if you have those goals in mind, if you have the positive net income and you're putting money aside every month to save for those goals, you will be able to meet them, and that's going to feel very satisfactory. All right. Okay, so what to do if you either have a negative net income, so you're spending more than you're bringing home, or you want to save more and you feel like there's some room to do that. So there's dozens of ways to approach this, but I kind of came up with just based on things that have worked for myself personally, things that have worked for clients that I've worked with, kind of advice out there in the financial advisory world. I've come up with a short list of 15 simple ways to cut expenses. So hopefully these are some tips that maybe you all will find valuable. The first is review your credit card statement monthly. So maybe you are every month paying your credit card minimum without thinking about what that is. Maybe you're just seeing, okay, minimum due, and you're paying that without really figuring out, okay, what's in that statement. You don't want to do that. Again, just because you're not looking at it doesn't mean that it goes away or it changes. It's very important to face reality, very important to figure out what you're spending. You might find, and this has happened time and time again, I've seen this, where people have reoccurring expenses on their credit card bills for services that they no longer use. And that is a very easy way to begin saving money. Maybe I think Apple is notorious for this. There's certain storage fees that they charge without, and it's on a reoccurring basis. Magazines do this as well, where they auto renew. when I sat down with my mother a number of years ago and went through her finances, and she was very generous from a charitable contribution perspective, but she had a number of charities that had not only taken her initial donation, but also put her on a reoccurring charge as well that she really was not tracking and not recognizing. So that's really important to sit down and understand what's on your credit card. And if there are monthly reoccurring charges for services that you're not consuming or you no longer wish to consume, you want to make sure that you cancel those. Very, very important. You also just want to get a handle on what you're spending. So it could be that you use your credit card, to go out and spend on a lot of wants, and you kind of bury your head in the sand a little bit because you're just paying your monthly minimum. It's really important to understand where your money is going. So I can't emphasize that enough. And again, just because you don't look at it unfortunately doesn't make it disappear. It is what it is. So that's tip number one. Tip number two, and I've heard this for years, and I'm always astounded at how much of a difference it can make. But if you're really struggling to make ends meet and your expenses are bigger than your income, don't drink coffee outside your house. Brew your own pot of coffee every morning. That Starbucks or Peet's coffee, it does add up. Certainly does. So that's something simple. If you need the coffee, I'm a big coffee drinker. I love coffee. I brew it at home. I drink it at home. If I drink coffee outside of my home, it's because I'm having a coffee with friends, and we're socializing that way. So I view it as an entertainment expense, not a necessity, because you can make coffee at home. And that kind of brings us to sort of modify how you socialize. Again, the world is totally changed in the environment that we're in. So this may have happened to you kind of naturally. But a lot of socialization takes place over going out to dinner, having a few drinks, going out to see some type of entertainment together with your friends. That's great, that's wonderful, but maybe there's some simple things that you can do where you can still socialize, but be a little bit more economical about how you do it. So one thing is maybe instead of going out to dinner, you go out to brunch or lunch. That tends to be less expensive. Maybe you make sure that when you go out to dinner and people are ordering drinks, you order one drink. You don't order multiple drinks. So maybe there's some simple shifts of how you socialize. Maybe you can invite people over for dinner as opposed to always defaulting to going out. So maybe those are some different approaches that you can take. I'm just moving. We have the video of everybody who's blocking the next tile for me. Oh, the next tile. I love this tile, Mina. So the next tile is Love Your Library. There are some great resources that local libraries and Cary Library offer residents. They have the Museum Pass program. So you want to go to a museum, and again, I'm setting aside all of our COVID situation, but you want to go to a museum, check out if there's a museum pass for that museum you're interested in going to at Cary Library that you can check out and use. And Cary Library has a tremendous depth of digital books, of movies, of music, of newspapers, of other periodicals. Make sure you understand what those resources are, because that might be a money-saving opportunity for you as well. So that's certainly something you should do. Love your library. Another thing is, and I think this is important.
Oh, wait, I have to second that.
Yes.
I just have to second that.
Yes.
Yes,
Oh, yes.
love your library.
Yeah, love your library, and we'll give some nice applause.
Thank you.
So another important thing to do, I think, always, and again, this takes some time, this takes some effort, takes some pre-planning, but can be really helpful, is pick up the phone and call your cable company. Call your internet provider, call your cell phone company, and find out, are they offering a better deal than what you currently have? Oftentimes, I mean, if you call every month, then no. But if you're calling kind of annually to check up on what you're paying, and if there's a better deal out there, Sometimes there can be, and sometimes that can be a significant source of savings too. So don't just because you've had a contract with one provider for cell phone service for, I don't know, a decade, don't assume that you can't get a better rate if you call that provider. Don't assume that you need to switch to another provider to get a better rate. Oftentimes, if you've seen another offer from another provider and you're able to say, well, so-and-so can give me this for that, oftentimes these companies, they want to retain your business. It's always cheaper to retain a customer than it is to get a new customer. So oftentimes if you tell them about that competing offer, they will try to match it or at least lower what you're paying. So that can be a helpful source of savings too. Another thing you can do is if you're using credit cards a lot, make sure that you're using credit cards with some kind of perk program. Maybe these are frequent flyer miles if you travel a lot. Maybe these are credit cards with a cashback program. But credit cards, again, are always competing for your business. So if you're gonna use them and rely on them, you may as well get something in return. But that being said, I would not advise taking out another credit card just for the perk without transferring or cutting off an existing credit card. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where you have 15 credit cards that you're managing. My own personal advice is no more than 2 credit cards. Otherwise, it does become very complicated to keep on top of your finances. And that's sort of lesson 101 with budgeting, is you want to know what you're spending.
Inessa,
Yes.
a quick question about that. I'm not sure about if this exactly, but it is about credit cards.
Mm-hmm.
Can you use your credit card to pay bills like rent or mortgage?
So not usually, no, but it certainly doesn't hurt to ask. I don't believe, I mean, you can't use it to pay your mortgage as far as I'm aware. Landlords might be a little different, and perhaps they could, if that's something where you get a lot of reward points. Perhaps that's something that they could allow. A landlord might range from an individual person to a big company that owns the building. The big companies probably have sort of more protocols, but if you're working with the individual, so it might be something worth inquiring about. It's not likely, but it could be something worth inquiring about to check.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And I think that's a big lesson, is like when you have a question about something, pick up the phone and call. Again, it can be exasperating at times because you're left on hold. It's hard to track down somebody, but sometimes it really pays off, and you can find out things because there are oftentimes things that are so case specific that it is really worth your time to pick up the phone and ask that question.
Right. And you were talking about perks, and I know that, the more you can get on your credit card, the more perks you get depending on what the card is.
Yes, yes. I mean, so in my experience, so my mother was living at Sunrise Senior Living for a while, and that comes with quite a high price tag. And so that's something that we had inquired about, is could we use a credit card to pay for that? And they did not allow that. So I suspect the answer, I know for mortgages, or I'm pretty sure for mortgages, that's not allowed. But I do feel like a landlord might have a little more flexibility depending on who they are. All right. So another thing to look at is sort of the phrase "cutting the cord." There's a lot of money that people can pay for those cable bills. So one thing you can do is call the cable company, and again, you make sure that you're getting their current best offer. But what you might find is that you're not utilizing a lot of the channels in that cable package. So are there other ways, if you're a big TV watcher, maybe you're able to get by on Hulu and Netflix and watch all the shows that you want to and save some money that way. So that's certainly worth exploring too. The next thing I have on here, this is another one of my favorites. This is a 7-day rule. This is my own personal rule. So this is when I want to buy something that falls into that want category. I think about it for 7 days. I see it. I think I spot what it is. I say, I feel like, okay, I need that, whatever it is. Right now it's sweaters because the weather's turning colder. So I keep seeing sweaters as I'm doing things online, and a sweater ad will pop up. I'm like, oh, I love that sweater. But what I say to myself is, I'm not going to buy that immediately. It will still be there in 7 days. And if that particular sweater isn't there in 7 days, there'll be another very similar sweater. Things are not irreplaceable, especially with online ordering and access to being able to order things online. So I put that aside. I think to myself, okay, I want that, but if I still want it in 7 days, then it's okay to buy. And if I don't want it in 7 days, well, it meant that that was an impulse purchase. So if you're somebody who sort of struggles with, like, in that moment, I really want X, just use that 7-day rule. And if 7 days is too long, use the 24-hour rule. Make some rule for yourself. And you're not saying you can't do it, you can't purchase it. You're just saying, I really want to make sure that I really do want it, that it's not just an impulse that later I'll regret. And along those lines, I would say for larger purchases, it is always good, even for smaller purchases, it's always good to read reviews, especially when you're ordering things online. But even when you're not ordering things online, to figure out how long something is going to last. I think that's really important. I mean, it used to be, again, going back to my mother, I remember replacing her refrigerator, and she had had the same refrigerator for 40 years. Her refrigerator lasted that long. We go out, she needed a new refrigerator, purchased a new refrigerator, and that refrigerator, it conked out after about 5 years. We really should have read the reviews a lot better, kind of not gone just for the cheapest option, but make sure it was something that was reliable, that was going to last for the long haul. We were able to get the refrigerator fixed, but it still is the type of thing where you used to be able to buy an appliance and count on it lasting a long time. In my experience, that's changed somewhat, and so it really pays off to read reviews and make sure that for the larger expenses, it's going to be something that lasts, especially if there are multiple options. So another thing you can do, and this applies for if you own your own house and are carrying a mortgage, is look into refinancing your mortgage. Rates are low. Rates have been low for a while, so perhaps you've already taken, for those of you that have a mortgage, maybe this is something you've already taken advantage of. But if you took out debt to purchase your home 10 years ago, you want to see what the current rates are and see if it makes sense to refinance. And so that's something to do as well. Another small tip, exercise. So monthly gym charges can be a lot of money. You want to see, okay, are you really using your gym on a regular basis? Maybe you don't need your gym. Maybe you can take walks outside. Maybe you can, there's all sorts of smaller gyms nowadays where you can purchase a class here or there. Maybe that's sufficient for your exercise needs. Maybe you don't need to carry that monthly gym membership. So that's something that you might look at. Health insurance. Okay, yes. So every year, if you're working, you're going to have, or even if you're not working, there's going to be an open enrollment period for your health insurance plan. And if you're working, you're likely going to have a couple of different health insurance plans through your employer that you can choose from. You're going to want to look at that annually and see what the choices are, and make sure whatever choice you're enrolled in now is still the choice that you want for the next year. Again, to me, this falls into the category of it takes a little bit of work, but it's worth the effort, because you don't want to pay for something that you're not using, nor do you want to pay for something that's insufficient for your needs. And if you don't take an action, you're just re-enrolled in the plan that you're already enrolled in. So you want to be proactive and take advantage of those open enrollment periods. You also want to make sure that you're taking whatever tax deductions you're entitled to. So that over the last 3 years, the tax code has changed pretty significantly. There are some tax deductions that have gone away, or some have been capped, like the mortgage interest deduction is capped at $10,000. But there are a couple of other deductions related to student loan interest. There's a lifetime learning credit that can be available if people are taking classes. Some of those deductions and credits are phased out depending on what your income level is. So you always want to make sure you're consulting with somebody who's an expert in taxes. But you do want to know what those are, because the IRS is not going to, if you're entitled to a deduction and you don't take it, nobody from the IRS is going to call you up and say, hey, you didn't take this deduction that you're entitled to. So again, this falls into that category of investing a little bit of time, being proactive, making sure that what you're entitled to, you're taking advantage of. That's really important. And then the last two is sort of, they're both shopping related. And again, I think this is sort of more towards the person that tends to maybe overspend on some of those impulse buys. But if you have shopping apps on your phone, delete those immediately if those are things that are leading you to make those impulse decisions. I worked with somebody who had an alert setting set up on her phone. So as she drove past stores, she would get offers, saying, oh, you're entitled to this offer from Kohl's. And yes, it would lure her into the store, and she would end up spending on things that she didn't need because of that offer. And for that reason, that's sort of this last tip here is using coupons. That can have a real savings. But if you're signing up for coupons services, or you have registered in an online store for their promotions, you're going to be bombarded with special offers and special limited time offers. And it's going to create the sense of urgency and make you feel like, oh, you need to sign up for and purchase XYZ immediately. No, you don't. You don't need to buy it unless it's a necessity. And if you're getting those messages, if you're using shopping apps and coupon services, it might lead you into temptation. So if that's a problem area for you, if shopping's a problem area and impulse buying is a problem area for you, just remove the temptation. You don't need it. So I rattled off a whole lot there. Any questions on this huge laundry list?
No, but I mean, feel free to ask questions. You can unmute yourself, but I have to say that's very thorough.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot, and it's hard. It is hard figuring out what is truly, if you need to cut your budget, if you need to cut what you're spending, it can be a challenge to figure out, okay, how do I do this? It can feel overwhelming. And I would also say too, like if you're in that situation, your tendency might be, okay, I'm going to go very bare bones and I'm going to spend my only necessities. And that could be really hard too. It's like a diet. It's like if you are trying to lose a few pounds and you're putting yourself on a super strict diet, and you've been really good up until like 8 o'clock in the evening, well, then you're going to get hungry, and that's when you're going to tend to cheat on the diet. It's the same thing with putting yourself on a spending diet. If you're overly restrictive, it's going to be difficult. It might be tempting to cheat and spend where you shouldn't be. So kind of doing what you can, doing what feels easy first, I think is really helpful in getting you on the right path.
Totally makes sense.
All right. Okay. So debt. So we talked about debt a little bit. We talked about credit card debt. This is always a question, and financial advisors are going to have different pieces of advice for you. Some financial advisors are going to say, no, you shouldn't pay off your debt. Maybe it's because, and some people are going to have that philosophy. And they're going to have that philosophy because they're going to feel like, okay, if you don't pay off your debt, you're going to have more cash in your hands. And maybe you have a better use of that cash, or maybe you can invest in that cash and earn more than you're paying in the credit card fees. my own personal philosophy is to pay off debt when and where I can. And if you want to look at things from an analytical approach, that's another framework you can use to evaluate should you be paying off your debt. Step number one is you're going to want to identify all the debt that you have. So credit card debt, mortgage debt, student loan debt. You're going to want to identify what that is. You're going to want to know what interest you're paying on those pieces of debt, how much interest you're paying on your mortgage, how much interest you're paying for your credit card debt, how much interest you're paying on your student loan debt. Some of those interest payments are going to be tax deductible, as we were talking about. So there's a student loan interest deduction of $2,500 that is currently in the current tax code. And you can also deduct your mortgage interest up to $10,000. So you are going to have some tax savings. But that's not a dollar-to-dollar savings. So you may be able to deduct $2,500 for student loan debt, but for student loan interest. But you may actually be paying more than that in student loan interest. So you have a deduction, but it's not offsetting the amount of interest that you're actually paying out. So you want to look at what that is. You want to look at how much you're paying in interest. Is there a tax savings? And then is there an excess? Are you paying more in interest than you're saving from the relevant tax deduction? And chances are, yes, you are paying more in interest than you are saving from the tax deduction. If that's the case, you want to think about, okay, if I were to pay off this debt early, how can you afford that in line with your current budget? That's our question number one. Question number two is, if you don't pay it off, do you have a better use for that money? Are you able to invest it elsewhere in a way that it's going to earn more than you're paying in the interest rate? So, those are questions that you're going to want to look at. It's going to be very case specific. But generally, you should recognize, because people will say, oh, you don't want to pay off your mortgage because you lose the mortgage interest deduction. You should realize if you add up the amount that you're paying in interest for your mortgage, it is very likely more than the deduction that you're saving for that mortgage interest deduction. So again, this is one of those things that, it might take you a while. It's going to be case specific to your own personal financial situation, but it's important to look at. All right, how are we doing with time? Okay, maybe I'll speed up here. So credit score is something that's crucial. So if you're just starting out in your adult life, you want to establish credit. You want to establish and maintain good credit. If you're farther along in terms of where you are in life, you want to make sure that you're maintaining a strong credit score. There are credit monitoring services that you can sign up for. You might have seen ads from Credit Karma. I feel like Credit Karma is all over the place. There's something else called Credit Sesame as well. Those are services that you can sign up, and they'll alert you if something has happened with your credit rating. You can also obtain a free copy of your credit score from the various credit reporting agencies, and those are Transamerica, Experian, and what is the third one? I always forget. It's another E. And then there's also a website, I think it's Consumer Financial Reports, where you can actually request credit scores from all three credit agencies at once. You want to keep your credit score kind of in that middle range. It should be around, I think it's, let's see if I have that written. I'm just looking at my notes. Sort of like 650 to 700 is a good credit score, and anything on the higher side, so higher in the world of credit, in terms of not credit, in terms of your credit score, a higher number is better, a lower number is worse. And the way the credit monitoring or the credit reporting bureaus work is they're going to look at your ability to pay off your debt, They're going to look at the length of time that you've had credit. They are going to look at the fact that if you have multiple sources of credit, that can be a good thing. And let's see. And they're going to, right, so those are really the basic things. So they're going to look at how long you've had credit for, if you've been able to pay your bills on time, and if you have a diversity of credit sources. So not just student loans, but maybe student loans and a credit card. So they want to look at your ability to handle a couple different pieces of debt at the same time, or a couple different bills. And if you don't have a wide, and this will certainly be the case as you're starting out in terms of your adult life, if you don't have multiple sources of credit, you can register your utility bills to also be something that the credit agencies monitor for you. And you can do that through Experian.com. If you go to their website, they have an app that allows you to register those. So that gives you a wider diversity of credit. In terms of the time that you've had credit, nothing is going to change that piece of score. That's going to improve. As longer you live and the more credit you, the longer time you've had access to credit, the better that piece of the score will be. Then your ability to pay, and this is really the biggest chunk of where your credit score comes from, is your ability to pay your debt on time. And this is where I think there's a bit of a myth out there that at least I've heard from people before. What I've heard is, I need to carry a balance on my credit card because otherwise the credit rating agencies are not going to think that I can handle debt. That's not true. They're not looking to see if you've maintained debt on your credit card. What they're looking to do, what they look at, is whether or not, if you've had debt, have you paid it off? And otherwise, have you kept all your other payments current? So have you paid your student loan on time? Have you paid your credit cards off monthly? So I think sometimes there's a little bit of a myth out there, at least that I've heard before, that people feel like in order to establish credit and have a good credit score, they need to have debt. That's not true. You need to have access to credit, and that needs to be tracked over time. But you don't need to have debt. You should never be maintaining debt because you think that improves your credit score. That makes sense. Any questions on credit?
Just Sheila wrote that Equifax, is that E-word?
Yes, that was the other one I was searching my memory for. Yes, so it's Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. And it's, yes.
Annualcreditreport.com gives you a free report once a year from each of the 3 companies required by federal law.
Yes, correct. And then the websites like Credit Karma and Credit Sesame, those are private for-profit companies that monitor your credit. So you can sign up for credit monitoring, but you certainly do not need to in order to know what your credit score is.
Right. Yeah. Of course. Thank you.
Yeah. One other myth that I've heard too is that oftentimes when you're applying for an apartment or taking out a loan for buying a new car or something like that, that your credit record is harmed by the inquiry that the landlord or whoever is giving you the loan makes to get access to your credit score in order to make the determination whether or not they're going to extend the loan to you. So there are things called hard inquiries and soft inquiries. Soft inquiries are when you're getting access to your credit score yourself, and a hard inquiry is when a third party is doing a credit check for you. A hard inquiry can raise suspicion and can harm your credit rating, but it's for a temporary period of time. And the credit rating agency's explanation for this is if they're getting too many requests for your credit score, it could be a sign that you're suffering a financial crunch and you're signing up for a lot of debt and a lot of credit cards to handle that. But those inquiries, it's not a permanent impact. And if it's one inquiry, it's not going to make a big difference on your credit score. So you don't, if you're applying for an apartment, for example, for the first time and the landlord's requiring a credit check, you don't need to be nervous that that is going to destroy your credit. And that's something I've heard some concern about before.
Sheila also says that the credit card companies do a good job of monitoring for free. They've called us when they see red flag charges.
Yes, yes, I think that that's an important point too. Yeah, and I guess when in terms of fraudulent activity in your name, I actually had my identity stolen 12 years ago now, because it was when my twins were first born. And the situation was, my identity was stolen through a scam that was being run at my doctor's office. And it was this big, it's a long story. But anyway, somebody had written a check and had taken $5,000 out of my bank account, pretending to be me. And my bank immediately, once they realized that this person was not me, they immediately restored that money. So I think there's always a fear out there that there might be, your identity is going to be stolen and your life is going to be ruined forever. And sure, it's a hassle and you want to protect your data. You don't want your identity stolen. Of course not. Absolutely not. But if it happens, it's not the end of the world, and your bank and your credit card company will work on your behalf to try to figure out who is the source of the fraud. Because they're the ones at the end of the day being defrauded. So I think, I know that's a tangent, but I think, your life is not over if there is fraudulent activity. That's why you want to be looking at your credit card statements monthly, because you want to make sure that the charges that you're being charged are all legitimate charges and charges that you're doing. But if you notice a fraudulent charge, call your credit card company. They are there. They are going to help you and work with you on that.
Thank you. I was going to say too that sometimes people that are testing the waters will do like some small charges that you might not notice. And then all of a sudden they'll do a big charge because they're like, oh, they weren't paying attention, or, whatever. That's happened to us too, where we've had like a couple dollars or $5-6,
Yeah.
and we're like, oh, that's nothing, whatever. And then later
that's good to point out too. Right. And so, sometimes if you're looking at your credit card statement, if you're somebody who charges a lot, maybe there's a $2 charge that you just ignore. But it is good to try to make sure that everything on your credit card statement is a legitimate charge.
Right. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So now this is sort of the last piece of what I wanted to talk about is budgeting apps. Oh my goodness. There's a whole world of budgeting apps out there. I think there are over 200 in this one list that I looked at. So many. So I have to say, I do not use a budgeting app. I actually use Excel. I'm kind of old-fashioned that way, I guess. It's what I'm used to. So I write it down myself. I found that that's what works better for me. That might work well for you. Even pencil and paper might work well for tracking your expenses. But in this day and age where we have easy access to our smartphones and websites, it might be easier to set up a budgeting app. And there are a number of them available. So what I did here is I listed about 10 that seem to make, there are many articles on the internet, reviews of what these budgeting apps are. And these are 10 that commonly made the top 10 to 20 lists of the people doing the reviewing. And what I thought I would do, and Mina, are we still okay for like going 2 or 3 more minutes?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right, so what I thought I would do is just kind of give you an overview of what some of the strengths and weaknesses are of these. And there's some categories. So the first category I would put Mint and Wally into. So basically what these are is, so what Mint has been, I think, one of the original budgeting apps out there. And what they do is they tie into your bank account. So with one login, you can see everything that you're spending from your bank, from multiple credit cards. And they are very strong with reporting and giving you charts and graphs to sort of see how you're spending after the fact. So that's Mint. That requires you to share your bank and your credit card information with Mint so they can consolidate, they can give you that consolidated view. Again, kind of going back to data privacy, that might be something that you are comfortable with. That might be something, but that also might be something that you're not comfortable with. And that's okay. So Wally is similar to Mint, although you can manually enter in some of that information. So a great thing about Mint is that it's all automatically being pulled in for you. With Wally, you need a little bit more work, but you don't need to share your access to your financial accounts. But those two really focus on what you have already spent. What have you spent up to that period of time? The next two I would kind of have in this different bucket. So the You Need a Budget and Pocket Guard are both apps that have a little bit more of a forecast associated with them. So they allow you, and I think Good Budget, just double checking. Yes, Good Budget falls into that category too. So they're gonna allow you to set up what your income is, what your expenses are, log that, track that over time. But they're also going to allow you to set up those buckets I was talking about earlier. So your financial goals. So you can actually list out, these are my financial goals, and then start allocating the excess of your net income to those financial goals. They call them different things. I think Good Budget calls them, instead of using the terminology buckets, they use the terminology envelopes. And Pocket Guard uses the terminology pockets, hence the name Pocket Guard. But those three are very similar in that they're helpful when you are trying to save for financial goals. Simplify is a Quicken app. So Quicken budgeting, Quicken used to be just software that you had to download to your computer. It's morphed and changed. Simplify is their personal budgeting app. It's web-based. So if you would prefer not to use your smartphone and you want to do things online, that might be a good option to look at. Prism, their specialty is payment reminders. So again, you're going to have to link up your financial accounts in order for them to know what they're reminding you about, but they will send you a reminder that this bill is due. So if you have had trouble in the past and paying bills on time, Prism might be a good option to look at. Also, if you have had trouble paying bills on time, another really good thing to do is to set up as much automatic payments as possible. You can do that through your online banking services as well, to set up an automatic transfer. Okay, so that gets us to, Spendito. So Spendito and Wallet are similar in that they work on smartphones. Spendito is designed to work on iPhones, and Wallet is a budgeting app that apparently is better for Android devices. So if you're planning on doing your budgeting with your phone, those are very simple options, but they might be something worth looking at. And Personal Capital, that's the 10th one that I have on here. They're interesting. So they're actually an investment advisory firm. So through them, you can gain access to financial advisors to help you with investment decisions. But they do have free tools to help you with budgeting as well. But what they bring to the table that's different from some of the others is that they allow you access online, so through chat functions, and I think some web-based phone calls too, for financial advice. So if you're looking for something that's more robust with your budgeting, so you're looking to be able to record your income, your expenses, your net income, and then what you can do and how you can invest that net income, that might be a good option to look at. And then, of course, your current bank is going to be an institution that you can look at. Many of them have some budgeting tools. And then if you are associated with a brokerage firm like Charles Schwab or Fidelity or E-Trade, they might have budgeting apps as well. So again, they might have some limitations. I know some of the banks, they might have some budgeting functions, but it's tied into what you spend from your bank account. So they have limits in terms of what you can add in manually if you're also spending through credit cards and other transfers. But those might be good places to start as well if you're looking for an online tool to help. And as I said, there are hundreds more budgeting apps out there, so you can definitely find something that fits your needs. I think the important thing about just the main takeaway that I would leave you all with is take the time, invest the time into learning what your financial picture is and understanding it. And the documenting that, whether it be an app, a piece of paper, an Excel spreadsheet, a Google sheet, that's less important. What's most important is really understanding where you are, what your income is, what your expenses are, and if you have excess remaining, and if you have excess remaining, how are you going to allocate that to your financial goals?
Thank you, Inessa. That was amazing.
It was a lot of information.
So
Sorry, that did take me longer than I thought.
It is. No, it's really important. I wanted to know if there's any last minute questions. Feel free to unmute yourself or write it in the chat. But I did want to say Inessa will be back with us on Friday, October 30th, for another discussion, a different issue topic on finances. What is that? Let me look it up. Was that
is that investing or?
Let me see. I want to give you the right.
Yeah, I should have looked at that before we. I did mean to think about what it was, because I think we planned for 2 more sessions. So one was definitely sort of the basics of investing.
Right. And the next one is actually about savings.
Okay.
So, yeah. So we hope to see you all back here on October 30th, and we'll learn all about savings. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me, or and I'll send out a recap with this video link just a bit. So thank you, Inessa. I really appreciate you doing this for us. Thank you for everybody who stayed, and I hope you learned a lot just as I did.
Thank you, Mina.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.